Greetings and peace, everybody, and salam alaikum. Peace be with all of you and yours. I thank you for joining me today. And today I have the honor of Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Fatimiyya Sufi Tariqa of joining me and bestowing us with his love, light, and knowledge. And as you know, with my channel, I will always cover topics and discussions that the Western Masonic education system does not promote or does not talk about. So again, we represent ourselves only in this talk, and I will give the stage to Sheikh Wahid Azal to introduce himself and also to pass on the topic of discussion, which will be Islam's influence upon Freemasonry and Western esoteric groups in general. So, assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, and thank you for joining us today.
Bismillah al-Ahya al-Ajla, in the name of God, the most revocatively alive, the supreme discloser. In the Fatimiyya Tariqa, our greeting on my initiative has been changed from Salam Alaikum to Nur Alaikum, the light be upon you, with the response being Alaikum Nur, and upon you be the light. So Nur Alaikum, from the Fatimiyya Sufi order. It's interesting that we're broaching this topic because I'm a avid fan of a great Iranian social thinker who was secretly a mystic at the same time by the name of Dr. Ali Shariati. And this morning here, our time, just before we got on, I posted one of his quotes from his book, Religion Against Religion. And this is a very apropos quote for the discussion. It will give it somewhat of the tenure of what we're going to talk about. And he says, in the first chapter of this book, which was actually a lecture that he gave at the famous Hosseiniya Irshad in Tehran, he says that kufr, right, or infidelity, which is usually what is translated in English, but it actually means more than that. Kufr means to cover or to plant, i.e., where in farming, a seed is planted and then cover over it with dirt. In the hearts of people, and truth exists, but because for certain reasons, the truth is covered over by a certain ignorance, malice, self-seeking interests, or absolute foolishness, it is called kufr. This kufr, however, does not mean the covering over the truth of religion by means of non-religion. Rather, it means covering the truth of religion by means of another religion. And this seems to be a very prevalent phenomenon throughout human history. And probably in all the revealed religions, this has happened. And also in the world of the contemporary world that we're living in, some of the things that I have been thinking about recently is, trying to tackle this question of religious pluralism from a higher metaphysical point of view, from this kind of point of view of a Ibn Arabi. And I'm finding more and more in disagreement with this concept, not on the level of phenomena, but on the level of noumena, because if we are talking about Tawheed, then, the oneness of Allah subhanahu, whatever you want to call it or name it by, we don't necessarily even have to use the terminology of Arabic, the one without equal, God, whatever. The truth is one. Now, if all these various paths, there's a hadith that says that the truth is as diverse as the number of people. It's a prophetic hadith as well. Nevertheless, unless that point of view recognizes that all of these various points, all these kasarat, all these diversities converge in a single point, we're fooling ourselves. And this is what the modern world, and especially during the postmodern era that we're living in, has done, is that it has, we recognize there's a multiplicity of approaches in the world. That's obvious, an empirical fact. Yet the conclusion or the resolution to the dialectic of diversity is often missed, or one doesn't even, most people don't even acknowledge it exists anymore. So the dialectic in itself has become the be-all and end-all, or the two poles of the dialectic, right? On the one hand, you have religious pluralism and diversity. On the other hand, you have literalism and fundamentalism, right? But there's no attempt to try to bridge, or rather to understand the contradictions of these, to resolve it into the synthesis of what that kind of metaphysical tawhid that I'm talking about is pointing at. And with Freemasonry, I studied a lot of Freemasonic texts, and considered at one point in joining the lodge myself. I had a lot of friends, both in the United States and also in here in Australia, about 20 years ago, who were all Masons. And, by and large, these are good people, right? You also get a lot of bad fruits. But the one thing that I found, especially here in Australia, was that there is, because in Australia, the British rite of Masonry is the predominant rite, that there are biases and points of views and approaches that I fundamentally disagree with, because it is, from my point of view, it's a continuation of precisely the kind of colonialism and imperialism that I have been standing against my entire life. So, I declined that offer because I'm not going to swear to the Queen of England under any circumstances. When I became an Australian citizen, and my parents became an Australian citizen, we swore allegiance to the flag of Australia. They gave us that option, but not to the Queen of England. So I was not about to change that by joining a Masonic lodge. Now, in America, it's different because you have a diversity of rites. Not only do you have the British rite present there, you also have the Scottish rite, which is the oldest established rites in the United States. Then you have the various Mizrahim rites, and also the Martinists. The Martinist rites from Europe are present in the United States. So you have quite a variety of options, but not here in Australia. So I looked at Masonry from that point of view, but then I began to delve into the history of Masonry itself. And despite a lot of the claims that are made about, the antiquity of Freemasonry as Freemasonry, the historical evidence actually refutes that very conclusively. That Freemasonry as Masonry really begins with the coming of the Knights Templar during the Crusades, and their interaction, number one, with some of the Sufi brotherhoods in Palestine, and also, and more importantly, their interaction with the Ismailis in Syria and Palestine at the time. And it is as a result of this sort of, dialogue that occurred between the Order of the Knights Templar and these groups that eventually, once the Order of the Knights Templar found itself at loggerheads with the church itself, it reformed and, basically recreated itself after the persecution of the church into what we have as Freemasonry, especially since about the 17th century until the present. The question of an uninterrupted line between from the Templars to the Freemasonry that crops up at the beginning of the 17th century is still up for debate. I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and say that, yeah, there is, there's a possibility that there was an unbroken chain. But the evidence is almost non-existent. It's based on extremely measly evidence. And this is something that Masons need to address if they're going to be taken seriously. Understand that Masonry is a dying creed, that not a lot of people are being recruited, or if people are going into lodges, they're looking at rites such as the Martinists, etc., who are allowing women, or certain lodges that are opening their doors to the opposite gender. This frat boy club approach to all of this is also one that is needs to basically go away. Otherwise, without a question, Freemasonry is over. In that particular form. I'll hand it to you if you want to throw something
Yes,
at me. Yeah.
yes. Thank you, Sheikh. I definitely agree, and it's very important that you address these things because when the Knights Templar were there, they were studying under the Al-Banna Sufi order.
Yes. Yeah.
And the Al-Banna Sufi order told them that you have the cross, but we will teach you the meaning of the cross. And they also had what's portrayed the old man of the mountain, Rashid Ad-Sinan, who was the representative of Hassan Saba, the old man of the mountain. And together, a lot of them were studying different esoteric stuff, different schools of thoughts. And a lot of their lodges, you would notice, would have the numbers 787 written outside of it.
Yeah.
And 787 in Arabic, if you look at it, it's the square and the compass.
Yeah.
If you look at the gematria, the numerical value of Freemasonry, it also comes up to exactly 787. So there are different links that are attaching.
There's one more element that people shouldn't miss about 787. 787 is one digit more than the abject numerical value of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which is 786.
Yes.
So, and that's a very important thing to look at.
Yes, exactly. And you're right. Myself, when I joined Freemasonry in 2016, I have experienced Freemasonry in United States, in England, in other parts of the world, and it has given me a diverse approach on a lot of the stuff in the lodge that you have a lot of these guys that even email me all the time that the stuff that you're telling me they're not teaching me in the lodges because
Mm.
it's a kind of it's kind of a social club type of setting,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. That's
you
what
know
it's.
the real knowledge they're not getting it. So it fell into my responsibility because masonry teaches you, Sheikh, also to be a builder. So
Yes.
if nobody is doing what you want to see, then you do it yourself. So I started talking about a lot of these Islamic subjects, and even the Rosicrucians from Australia. I had the pleasure of speaking with them about a year ago, and there's a hidden gap between the Knights Templar and Freemasonry. Like you
Yeah.
said, that even the Masonic historians or scholars, they have a certain bias towards Islam that they don't want to address it. And that's
Mm.
exactly, even if you look at the day that the Knights Templar were persecuted, it was on a Friday, on a Jummah, which
Yeah.
is a holy day for Muslims, because a lot of them had believed that the Templars had became Muslim in secret, and they were connected with the Hashashin or the assassins. And there was like this big quagmire going on within the church, and the accusations that they had placed them under. And a lot of them also say that you have the concept of what they say Baphomet, which is the
Yes.
Leo Texil hoax.
Yeah.
But also they also say that it was a bastardization of the
Of
name
Muhammad.
Muhammad or
Peace be
Muhammad.
upon him. Yeah. Yeah.
So
It
sallallahu alaihi
was.
wasallam.
But there's
So
another angle I've looked at. I mean, the whole Baphomet phenomenon was a fabrication. Nevertheless, for example, when you look at the works of some of these crypto masons from the 19th century, like Eliphas Levi, and break down when they talk about Baphomet, it is very clear to me that the Baphomet that they're introducing has a lot of resemblance to the Archangel Metatron, who is supposedly the face of Yahweh, and who plays a very pivotal part and role in the esotericism of Shiism. You have, for example, prayers attributed to the first Imam Ali alayhi salam
mm,
in the collection by Ibn Tawus, where Metatron is directly invoked by name, the angel of the face. And I find this very interesting, given the interaction that we know occurred between the Ismailis and the Templars, and the name Baphomet itself, which is, in a sense, in one sense, you could say it's ridiculing the name of the prophet, but in another sense, it is misdirecting from the prophet himself and trying to indicate something that is related to the prophet. And what can
yeah,
that be other than Ali, the Wali al Awliya, the chief of the vicegerents of the era, the speaking Quran from the point of view of Shiism.
yeah.
And I've contemplated that for many years. The problem is that once these ideas, especially when they're first esoteric and they're transmitted originally from heart to heart, and then later through Chinese whispers they get textualized. The
Mm,
original meaning of these symbols and what they're supposed to indicate, etc., are corrupted and missed, and so the church takes the symbolism as evidence of the Satanism of the Masons or the Templars, whereas I've kind of, the more I have dug, the more I have found this sort of a convergence between the symbolism of the Archangel Metatron and the figure of Ali alayhi salam in this figure of Baphomet.
I agree completely because myself, coming from a Sunni background from Pakistan, and growing up, I also had a lot of Shia friends here in America, and my Masonic journey and seeing the oneness and the Tawheed of the different things, even going back to Pakistan and seeing all of the different tariqas that are there, it came to my heart, Sheikh, that all of this indifference, even in the Islamic community of Sunni, Shia, all of that, I see the Tawheed, the oneness of Allah
Yeah.
subhanahu wa ta'ala, in all of it. So for me, I see you as a brother and as a beloved elder, just like I would see anyone else. And that's the world that I want to create, not just in the world of Al Islam, but also in the world of Freemasonry, where I have to teach them, like, this is where your true origins are. And this is, you have the oneness of all faiths that are teaching you everything. And in Freemasonry, Sheikh, they also have the point within the circle. So the point within the circle, they say, is the grand architect of the universe, or
Yes.
Allah, or God, or whichever way you perceive the divinity. And they say everything around that circle is a tapestry of different colors and patterns.
Yeah.
that's to be celebrated, that ultimately everything leads back to that one source.
Yes.
There was one sheikh here who I had met, and he always says that Allah is the only reality. And the beauty of all of this knowledge that we're expressing is, myself, I was meant to come across you on this journey as well, and this the beauty of us connecting in many ways.
Thanks.
And it was an honor for me that I want to bring this sheikh to this conversation of me having this lifelong mission of reforming the Masonic Brotherhood and defending the true Islam. That what is it that ties all of it together? What are the influences that are here, there, that you have people in the West or the so-called scholars that are refusing to acknowledge because they don't want to talk about it?
Well, I mean, the times that we're living in is one reason for it. I mean, look, until about September 11th of 2001, which is now coming to 20 years, I can't believe it, because it feels like it was yesterday. But until September 11th, there was still kind of a crack of openness within the Western Academy and Western society as a whole, to discuss these things more openly. Because prior to this, most of the West, and especially now more than ever, has been under the influence of the biases of the church,
Yeah.
Catholic and Protestant, and also Orthodox. And it's centuries-long Islamophobia and competitiveness and competition with the world of Islam. So it is basically, I mean, with what happened in 9/11, it sort of gave the lie away to these forces who for centuries have been trying to compete and push back against the Islamic world in their own way and have failed. And if they haven't failed, they have tried other means. But on the level of discourse, this is where this all comes from. So once 9/11 happened, all of a sudden we find the Western media and the Western establishment as a whole trying to turn Islam, the entire experience of Islamicate, as the late Marshall Hodgson denoted it, into a monolithic, aggressor and antagonist to what the West represents. Now, if you read up on the history of the European Enlightenment itself, right, you quickly find that many of the ideas that then get enshrined by a lot of these, Western European philosophers, I mean, political thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Locke, etc., the genesis of their own ideas find their formulation originally in the Islamic world. Just like the formulation of Western philosophy that begins with Descartes and this whole idea of the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, which is actually a misinterpretation, a gross misinterpretation of Avicenna's epistemology, Ibn Sina. All of these have a source within thinkers and ideas that were circulating within the Islamic world. And the scholarship, historical scholarship and historiography is tight on that. They cannot argue with this anymore. But given that, Western imperialism is predicated fundamentally on the notion of white supremacy, for people to give this idea up and to accord the kind of equality and the diversity that they claim to the Muslim world is a very, very difficult emotional thing for them to let go of. And it's their nafs. Essentially, we're dealing with a collective ego that refuses to, step down a couple of notches from its tantrum, as it were. But this will change. I see positive signs in all of this. I think one of the silver linings around this global COVID pandemic has been precisely this very thing. And just for the record, I'd like to say that my personal belief about the origins of the COVID-19 is that this comes directly from on high itself. This is plagues, pandemics are the domain of God Almighty. Look in your Bible, look in the Quran. So whether it began in a lab or in a wet market, or this is all completely besides the point. As the Quran says, not a leaf falls, not a single leaf falls without the Lord of the heavens knowing about it and having something to do with it or something to say about it. So I see a silver lining here is that, humanity as a whole is now beginning to find itself in a very vulnerable situation as a result of what it itself has been doing for the last, several hundred years, primarily stemming from the West's industrial revolution that thought that the natural world was its playground to exploit at will and destroy and do whatever it wanted to do with it forever. And so now we find ourselves in a place where Mother Earth itself is reacting very badly. And if we don't turn around right now, it will not make a difference whether, we are Muslim or Western or Chinese or Alaskan or from the North or South Poles. This human race will be under serious threat. And as environmental scientists keep telling us, if we don't turn that corner very soon, as a species, we will go the way of the dinosaurs. It's
Yes,
as
Sheikh,
simple as that.
I agree completely. And it hurts me because when I go to my local park, I see trash all over the place. I see people not respecting each other, people under the influence of alcohol and drugs and being nasty to themselves, their families. There's people here having relation issues. They're having mental issues, anxieties, depressions. And I'm thinking, is humanity at a crossroads right now? And is a species that's making its choice on which direction do you want to go? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also given us the aspect of the free will, that
Yes,
which way do you want to choose?
you have to
And
choose. Yeah.
that right now we're in this crossroads that they have to decide that it doesn't matter that you're too busy fighting about your race, religion, and gender, that you're not coming together to fix this world. I mean, even when I go to Pakistan, Sheikh, and all they're asking me is,
Mm.
can you help me get to America, or can you help me do
Yeah.
this or that? They're
Mhm.
just, and they're not treating each other right. They're always trying to one up each other in terms of, I have more connections than you, or I have a better business than you. And I'm thinking that, what is this human life about? If the angel of death visits us 5 times a day during the daily prayers, then what is this life? I think is just the goodness of our character. Everything else we just leave behind. And I would like your thoughts on that too.
I 100% agree. It's about the makarim. It's also understanding the world and the environment and the nature of existence with the makarim al akhlaq, being the basis and the substrate of this suluk, as it were, this wayfaring towards God. This is what it's all about. That's why in the Sufi turuq, all of them, you begin with the ethics, you begin with the akhlaq. Once you have built a solid foundation upon that, however you do it, then you move into the next levels of trying to understand the nature of the reality itself. Because the akhlaq, right? And this is something that will probably get me in trouble, but I'll say it anyway. The whole reason for the existence of a Sharia, which a lot of Muslims have completely lost sight of, is to basically build a individual foundation for people, both as individuals and as collectives interacting with each other, right? To have the ability to, number one, live in a sort of harmonious situation and generate harmony amongst themselves, so then they are able to make this path, this wayfaring towards God, right? Because the Sharia is not an end in itself. If it becomes an end in itself, it is no different than the idols that the Meccans were worshiping and putting in the Kaaba, right? And this is
Yeah.
the irony of all of this, is that the vast majority of Muslims are acting like mushrikeen, like idolaters, in their attitudes and in the things that motivate them, in their wants, lusts, and just their general way of being to the world, whether with each other or people elsewhere. So, I don't withhold my criticism of that part of the world at all. I think we have
Yeah.
a lot of problems, and these problems are very deep, very real, very insidious, and festering, and need to be dealt with. And just like in the West, where if somebody speaks the truth, they get either silenced. The same reality happens throughout the Muslim world, and you see it in the manner in which it happens. In that, most of the governments throughout the Muslim world are authoritarian, right?
Yes.
And they're authoritarian in a very modern way, right? Whereas, yes, you had in the past you had potentates and kings and that sort of thing. But if you look at the Islamic world in the pre-modern period, because maybe as a result of, or because there was no sophisticated technology, there was still a lot of autonomy for individuals and communities to do what they like, in spite of what authorities in the seat of power were doing. The modern world has changed all of that and has basically consolidated power. And as we're moving forward, things are getting worse and worse by the day, where this authoritarianism is basically infiltrating every area of life in order to control individuals and especially to control all forms of dissent. And this is one of the things that humanity as a whole needs to tackle very, very urgently if we are to survive, because this whole problem that we're facing, one of its motors is precisely this propensity of humanity to be authoritarian, to force its own point of views, etc. As a parent, I give my own experience, one learns a lot as a parent, right? And if one really wants to do successful parenting, this is the best laboratory of understanding how you yourself tick and also how humanity as a whole ticks. Children, unfortunately, unless sometimes they're compelled to do certain things, like, I tell my daughter, you have to brush your teeth twice a day or 3 times a day. She doesn't want to do it. I know that if she doesn't do it, then eventually she's going to have problems with her teeth. So this is the challenge, how do I make her understand this causality, that if you don't brush your teeth, right, twice a day or 3 times a day, eventually we're going to have to go to the dentist, you'll get a cavity and it'll hurt and all of that sort of thing. So this is the challenge that we face as a species, is how to generate environments where, compulsion does not become the only medium and the only routine and the only means by which, people are doing things, that we begin to get people to understand why they're doing things. But see, understanding, right, that reality where people begin to understand why certain things need to happen, why they need certain things, is a threat to power structures, and especially if they're authoritarian. They don't want that, because if human beings understand and are informed, then they can't be misled, right? And ruling elites and powers, it's that great quote from Star Wars, the Revenge of the Sith, where Palpatine turns to Anakin Skywalker for, just a few scenes before he turns him into Darth Vader. He says to him at that opera, those who have power are always afraid to lose it. This is the reality of ruling powers and elites and ruling classes, etc. And they don't want to give that up. And informed populations, or populations that understand, that are deliberating and thinking all the time, are threats. You see this in a work environment. If you have an employee that is asking too many questions of their boss, gets in the black book. It goes on and on. But this paradigm is one of the problems that we're facing as a humanity right now, because we understand that this is the wrong way of doing things, right? And the Makarim al-Akhlaq, especially if you read the Hadith, is saying that people need to be ethical and be moral agents out of desire. That means that they need to understand why a certain causality exists, whereby I don't barge into my neighbor's house and steal his TV or jump into bed with his wife or those sorts of things, right? There has to be an understanding. You have to understand the causality, consequence, etc. That kind of thinking is extremely important for people to take on. And the Hadith and Quran say this themselves.
Yes, Sheikh, I agree completely. And in terms of the Hollywood, there's one thing about Star Wars that stood out to me. That Star Wars kind of shows you the aspect of the Sufi path, where you have Al-Jedi, which is the master of the way, to be the Jedi. And what also stood out to me in another part of Hollywood, because Hollywood will always show you the truth in some way.
Yes.
So you have the John Wick movie, the third one, where the only people that can help him are the Hashashin in the Middle East when he goes and pleads for his life. So is there, you think a possibility of that a power structure behind the scenes is still possible today, if even Hollywood is showing something like that?
The truth is always present, look, no matter how much there are attempts to dilute and cover up and all of that sort of thing, the truth never goes away. It always manages some way to show itself, and the Quran says that, in that surah, we shall show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves until they are convinced that it is the truth. And that's the process. So even Hollywood, with all of its own corruption and masquerading and all of that, eventually, you will find a script for a movie on a certain issue. that will express certain truisms, that are self-evident and axiomatic as far as the universe is concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's completely true, and I agree completely. And I would also like to ask you, with the way the future is going in terms of humanity and what I'm seeing here in America and in my home country. And my basically mission of life, Sheikh, is to bring humanity together, the one ummah that
Mm.
our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, instructed us to do. And I see basically in my, political or anything that I'm doing in terms of Freemasonry or anything else that I'm involved in, I see it as a venue to bring people together. As it says in Surah 2, verse 62, that it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you believe in God and the last day and be righteous, then you will have no grief. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell people, is that there are concepts that are trying to divide us, or spreading lies against Islam, or not giving Islam credit, let's say, in terms
Yeah.
of its credit to Freemasonry or Western groups in general. And that's what I would like to ask you, is that
Sure.
how can we fill that void in terms of teaching them the proper education, and especially a lot of the Western esoteric groups as well. Even Rosicrucianism,
Oh, all of them. All
Christian
of them.
Rosicrucians was taught by the Sufis. So I would like
The
you to explain.
Western ceremonial magic, etc. I did a podcast with what was that group called? Alexander Eth and his glitch bottle.
Hmm.
About it'll be 4 years now at the end of the year, and he really liked it, and we got a very good positive response from all of this. And then he wanted to have me back. That's never happened. The reason being is that one of the people that supports this podcast, I won't name them, and I got into a very heated discussion, first on his list and then ultimately in private message on Facebook, where I condemn, and I can prove this textually, that the basis of most of Western ceremonial magic, or the Solomonic tradition, of the grimoire tradition of ceremonial magic, has its roots directly within the text of occult Islamic texts. And I can prove
Yes.
that. And right now, Ahmed al-Buni is becoming very popular, and there's more and more people in the academy and in the popular medium. They're talking about al-Buni's Shams al-Ma'arif, but Buni is only one figure. Buni was just a mere encyclopedias and a myriad of practitioners and writers in this particular area of Islamic spirituality. To make a long story short, this person, who is a very eminent Western ceremonial magician, basically had a cow, and we blocked each other, and he blocked me from his list. The usual stuff that happens in social media.
Yeah.
Um, then there's another gentleman who actually lives here in Australia, and I have a real problem with this guy. And he is not only an eminent ceremonial magician, he's also an academic, where he outright denies, all evidence be damned, that there is such a thing as Islamic theurgy. And his definition of theurgy is so limited and so banal and uncritical, that no matter how many times that you try to say, look, your typologies and your methodologies of defining theurgy are completely nonsense, because you're not historicizing it, number one, and you're not acknowledging that these ideas take on evolutionary life of their own between cultures.
Yes.
The individual doesn't dare to say the same thing about Judaism, although the argument, implicitly from what he is saying, would also apply to Judaism and the Kabbalah as well. But he's very open and very brazen in saying that there's no such thing as theurgy in Islam. Now, you show evidence to this guy of the approach that Islamic cultists take towards, for example, the names of God, the massive amount of Ogaf, or the magic squares, the harmonia that exists throughout texts, all of these various things, and the guy is just completely silent. So
Mm.
we go back to the point that there is a emotional bias, right? And
Yes.
that emotional bias comes from a place of ignorance that is animated by hatred. And from my point of view, and from the point of view of my reading, from what I have read of Hadith and the Quran and etc., this is rooted in hate. And this kind of hate is the hate of ignorance, because there's as much as we say hate, there are kinds of hate that are actually quite salutary and important. One of the Gnostic Gospels speaks about this very urgently, that one must hate hypocrisy, hate the untruth, right? In Shiism, we call this bara, and it stems from the two wings of la ilaha illallah. So bara is the negation, right? And its opposite is the tawalla or wala'a, which is the illallah or the affirmation.
Yeah.
But that kind of ignorance that we're finding, and that kind of hatred, which is intransigent, stems from an issue of the loss of control. If these people admit to themselves, with the evidence in front of them, that they're actually maybe don't have a full picture of what is going on, then in their own minds, they believe that their own status is somehow diminished, right? And this is the behavior, the typical behavior of all ruling classes, all dominator groups, no matter what it is, and it's what animates white supremacy from start to finish. The fear of the loss of status, right?
Yes.
But this is the thing, from my point of view, when you're talking about as collective suluk, as collective wayfaring, that means that a majority of people in the West who hold to that point of view are actually stuck, right? Now, white supremacy or racism is not an innate thing. When a child is born, a white child is born, there's no racism in that child. That child is as pure as any other child, right?
Yeah.
But over time, this nurturing and this reinforcement of these ideas of the ethnic and, I don't believe in the concept of race. It's just a scientific, fallacy. Over time, this nurture instills this idea of a superiority. But their notion of superiority stems from merely a material superiority over the planet, and just only in the last 200 to 400, let's say 500 years since the discovery of the Americas, or not discovery, you even throw that word out, since Columbus sailed to the Americas, right, and the Spanish began to colonize it. That is where these ideas stem from. It is also the belief that Christianity of the church, not the Christianity of Christ, but the Christianity of the church is the only one, and everybody else is a heathen, and we must either compel them to believe as we do, or they must die. And this was basically not only the attitude, but the action of these people for the last 500 years. Now, like I said, until 9/11, things were moving in a very positive direction. You were seeing a lot of people discussing things. There was more of an openness, conferences, discourses, books, media, there was an opening, despite the fact that only a few, 2 or 3 decades before, America had that bitter experience with the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian Revolution. Nevertheless, until about that 2001, things were beginning to kind of chill out, and there was more discussion. Once that event hit, it turned the page, and here we are almost 20 years later, where the attitudes, although the COVID, like I said, alhamdulillah, has diluted a lot of this, right? Nevertheless, there's still this suspicion, still this hardness, still this, anxiety that the white man has. And I say white man, and I say this for a very specific reason, because my experience of the white woman has been very different. I'm not saying that, white women cannot be racist, but I find that white women are far more reasonable, even the ones that can come across as racist from time to time. If one can get them to sit down and talk to one, you can take that demon out of them much easier than you can with a white male. Now, why that is, that's a whole different discussion. So there is a glimmer of hope out there, right? It is about understanding. It is about getting people to stop these emotive reactions to situations, and also emotive reactions about their own security in the wider world. Because this is the issue that a lot of white people have. They believe that if they, acknowledge certain points of view, especially, for example, on points of scholarship and history, that somehow begins to take away from them their status and their uniqueness. But this, in a sense, is myopia on steroids for a very simple reason, is because there is a collective human experience. The planet has had more inhabitants than just a group of Europeans, who have managed to colonize certain parts of the planet, right? And, certain people have said to me in the past, well, the arguments that you're raising in the way that you're raising, tends to put certain people up because it sounds racist to white people. My answer is, first of all, nonsense. because racism, by definition, is systemic, so it's a one-way street. But number two, my goal is to reach that parity.
Mm.
My goal is not to attain domination, because then we're doing the same thing again. No,
Yes.
you understand?
Yes.
The point of view is to reach that parity, right? To get, those attitudes that have been nurtured into a majority of white people to, to leave them. So what that means is that people like myself involved in this sort of work are in essence engaged in a form of collective exorcism, if you would, for lack of a better way. We're trying to exorcise this demon out of people. Because it's an idea, it's a mind virus. It has no reality outside of that, right? And the existence of people from the Muslim world or even a non-Muslim world is no threat to another human being. Now, if we had an extraterrestrial race wanting to invade this planet, that's a different discussion. But human beings are not a threat to each other unless we're talking about these artificial barriers and power structures that continue to plague this humanity like parasites and are now on the verge of destroying this planet as a whole. And this goes especially for environments and milieux such as Freemasonry. This is exactly what's going on. So the question to a lot of these Freemasons who are behaving in the way that you complain about is that, what is it that they are trying to achieve? Do they believe that by, very greedy whoop, we got lost there.
Oh yeah, yeah. You
Yeah,
it got stopped at when you were
yeah,
saying about
yeah,
very greedy.
yeah. It's the question that has to be asked of these people is that in themselves, in their own minds, what do they believe that they are going to achieve
Yes.
by being greedy about guarding these ideas and denying the ideas of other people, or denying the cultural and historical contributions of a group of people in history? What do they believe that do they believe that they can perpetually maintain their own status? Are they basically guarding over King Solomon's mines? They're not. In fact, they're impeding their own progress. They're impeding their own growth, and absolutely from an ultimate spiritual point of view, they are actually creating problems for the salvation of their own eternal soul in the hereafter by being that way. If they only understood.
Yes. I agree with you, Sheikh, and it's very important that you address these points, because I remember the aspect of you coming on to that podcast and the truths that you shared, and I realized that in the aspect of the truth that you're sharing, your information was repressed and suppressed in many ways, the truths that you were sharing. That's why you have all of these people coming out of the woodwork to attack you.
Yes.
Same with what I'm doing with my Masonic education. There's a lot of people that are in the groups or where they promote Masonic education. Very few of them, like maybe one or two, that are like true Masons and true brothers that will acknowledge you, while the rest of them will not like give me any credit or mention me in any way. So that this is what encouraged me to build my own platform and to basically share all of these truths that I'm sharing, which in effect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the strength to do it, to basically teach them in return. And alhamdulillah, I have been very successful at it, and which also made me feel that heart and spiritual connection to you, that I want to make contact with the Sheikh, with the niyyah that I have, and give him the platform and let him share whatever truth that he wants without any fear of any suppression of his voice, his ideals, his thoughts for humanity, because I share the same views as you on many things. And that's why it's important that it's people like us that come together and support this idea of teaching the oneness to humanity, coming together, teaching the aspect of suppressed knowledge that they're not talking about anywhere else. And that's important that we do that. And I agree with you completely. And over time, I am seeing a change even within the Masonic community. It's gradual, but it's happening. Now I see a lot of these other Masons that are coming out with their own channels, podcasts. They're making their lectures. So ever since COVID hit, it has been kind of a blessing in disguise for a lot of this Masonic education to just
See?
come out and teach people.
Yeah.
So there is a reason for everything.
Yes.
And
There is.
another question I wanted to ask you, Sheikh, besides the Islamic influence on Freemasonry and Western groups in general. What do you think of William Burroughs and his obsession with Hassan Saba, the old man of the mountain? Like, do you have any correlation with that?
Um, it's interesting you asked that because I've had an on and off correspondence with one of Burroughs's kind of implied disciples, which is Peter Lamborn Wilson, who
Yeah,
goes by the name of Hakim Bey. Um, Burroughs was a romanticist, and at the time, obviously, that amount of information about what Hassan Saba, or the old man of the mountain, or actually Dina Sinan, the Syrian version of the same, what these people were about. So Burroughs's notion was very romantic, but with his student, Peter Lambert Wilson, this propelled Lambert Wilson to actually move to the Middle East. And during the 60s, he was, on these hippie trails throughout Pakistan and ended up in Iran until early 1979 with the revolution there.
yeah,
And so he delved as much as he could possibly delve into this whole situation. I'm not sure if his Arabic and Persian is that advanced or was that advanced for him to be able to access manuscripts and texts. But what Peter Lambert Wilson did is to basically bring these ideas about the Nizari Ismailis and the whole Ismaili experience to wider attention in the mainstream consciousness. So previously was more the domain of scholars and specialists and that sort of thing. So with the publication of his book Scandal in the late 80s, this galvanized and inspired a lot of people out there.
mm,
And this was a book, that was published, I think, by a very small publishing outfit. And as soon as that book came out, I think they sold out of the first edition of that thing very quickly. But even though Lambert Wilson himself was, also coming from a popular position about this, but the ideas that he put out there about the Nizaris, and especially what happened in I think it was about 1165 with the proclamation of the Qiyamah in Alamut. This has propelled and inspired entire generations of people out there. But Burroughs was the spark for Lambert Wilson, even though Burroughs himself may have not known all that much about it, even though he was obsessed with it.
yeah. That I thank you for that, and that's the most concise explanation that I heard, because looking into all of these different aspects of popular culture, such as the Assassin's Creed video games and Burroughs and all of this stuff, where they mention the Ismailis, but they don't like give them that much credence because they don't want to talk about the Shiism or the other aspects of Islam that are hidden and they don't want to talk about. And it just comes to show that even in al-Islam, like in the occult aspects, there's a lot of even hidden knowledge that even your average Muslim who's clouded by Sharia or under these different jurisdictions of these different countries where they're not allowed to pursue a certain level of knowledge. They just want to keep them at a
Yeah,
certain level and they don't want them to exceed. And this
yeah,
is what helped me becoming a student of both the East and the West, myself having Persian ancestors as well. That when I came to the West, I saw these different groups. I experienced Sufi tariqas here in Pakistan. I seen the difference between how they practice it here, how they do it in the East. I saw the aspects of the Masonic Brotherhood, its origins, its teachings of the grand architect and the oneness of all peoples and the peace. But then again, like you said, everything is teaching you the truth, but it's the human element that wants to maintain its power and control that comes and has blockages here. Then in the East, you have your own challenges. In the West, you'll have your own challenges. And that's why it's important for us to share these thoughts with humanity and the world, because if you're not doing what you're doing, then who's going to take your place? That's the most
exactly.
important thing that
That's it.
stood out
Yeah.
to me about, Sheikh Wahid Azal, that, what's the most important thing? Why is it that what I call the enemy, why is it that the enemy always suppresses him or puts him down, or why they do the same to me, why they do the same to others?
Because we are a threat to these people, because we're a threat to their status, their ego.
Yeah,
I have copped it, you know, in many ways, and this is going on 20 years now. It's not just yesterday or today. And it is my belief that my dear uh, past bereaved wife took one for the team in a sense. We were both very active. She was also active. She wasn't just a passerby. And this enemy, this shaitan, is relentless, and until it is put down for the count of 10, it will keep coming.
Yeah.
And this is what people have to understand, that when you get into a path like this, right? You have to make that firm commitment that you will stand there to the end like a rock. If they cut you down, they cut you down. But if they don't cut you down, you prevail. And it's not
Yes.
even you prevailing. It's not about your ego prevailing. It's the truth prevailing. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, I talk a lot about the Bab, Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, is that because one of his forms of tahleel, the saying of the La ilaha illallah, he says, La ilaha illallah haqqan haqqan. There is no God but God truly, truly. And the mystery of the way that he has expressed this and the abjad and numerology of all of this is such that when this truth, the haqq, is fully appreciated within the wujud, within the being of every individual, then that makes you that rock. That makes you that rock to stand in front of these people, no matter what they come at you. I mean, I have had one of the biggest religious organizations on the planet against me, determined to wipe me out, and vice versa for the last 20 years. And on it goes, and all of those things that are connected to it, vice versa. They have created a lot of trouble for me, to the point of affecting my material existence when we were in Germany, and also now here that we're in Australia. But I say, just as the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Fakri, fakri." My poverty is my pride, But I might be materially poor compared to you, who are living in the ostentation of Nimrod or Pharaoh, but I am rich with Nurullah. That is the only rich wealth that is worth anything in the whole of existence.
And you are very rich, because I sense that aura and I sense that love from your spirit. And I agree that everywhere you went, I guess the occult terminologies, they would call it being a targeted individual, or gang stalking,
Yeah.
where you yourself or your wife, God rest her soul in peace, have been affected, and all of these things that have taken place. So you're right, this path is not for the weak. You need to have the strength, the courage, and the endurance to go from one place to another, just like our prophet, peace be upon him. He was being persecuted by the Meccans, and the aspects of starvations, burying his own blood, and all of the things that happened to him. If you want to walk through those trials and tribulations, you have to be ready for the challenges that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you to test your faith.
And that, my friend, is the real sunnah of the Prophet, which a lot of the mashayikh out there don't understand. That is if you could walk like that, if you could be like that, if you could sit in front of the Kaaba and have an entire multitude of people come and pour trash on you as you're worshiping your God, then you can talk about following the sunnah of Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah, peace be upon him. That's exactly true. And this is the truth. When I went to a lot of the Sufi sheikhs in Pakistan, I went to, they call it Data Darbar in Lahore, Ali Hajveri. I went there. I went to a lot of the places on the India-Pakistan border region. I went to a lot in Karachi, in Islamabad, and a lot of them were Persian sheikhs as well. Because, at that time it was all one area.
Yes.
So there's a lot of blessings, including Bari Imam, who's also a Persian sheikh in Islamabad. And you go to all of these places and feel the presence and the love, but you also feel the struggle that they went through to achieve what they had to achieve. That aspect of to get closer to Allah, where you have to go through those trials and tribulations. Even in Freemasonry, they tell you that everything is for God, by God, and under God. And when you walk this path, it may not always be easy, but you always come out, the good men becoming better men, that aspect. And that's what always makes me think of Al-Islam, that all of these paths in the West, Rosicrucianism, the Masonic Brotherhood, all of this stuff is tied to the Sufi occult teachings of Islam.
Yes.
And this is this is what made me motivated to reach out to you, to get your wisdom and to get your light, to share with humanity, and to share your message with the world. And that's what motivated me and encouraged me, and I thank you for that very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you have any closing thoughts for us, and please take all the time you need.
What can one say other than La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al azim? No power and no strength is there but save in God, the High, the Mighty.
Thank you, Sheikh. And is there anything else that you would like to share in terms of Islam, Sufism, Freemasonry, and anything else which the foundation of this talk in general?
Well, I mean, if your listeners have questions, we can talk about it. Maybe even future podcasts with very specific questions they want to formulate, where we can explore these things. I'm open to that. Um, at the moment, I have a strike on my account, which is a very bizarre situation. Actually, I should mention this. I was approached by a journalist for the Independent UK about almost 2 months ago now. This is
Yeah.
how these sort of things that happened to me. And he wanted to interview me, and it was going to be a short interview, and it was going to hit the one of the columns for the Persian section of the Independent.
Mm.
And he called me, and his Skype and my Skype weren't working together very well. He didn't know how to work with Zoom, so I said, look, why don't we record from my Zoom, and I will send you the files immediately after we get off. And so we
Yeah.
did the interview, and it was a short 10, 15-minute interview. And then I sent him the files. 2 weeks later, this story was supposed to go on the page of the Independent.
Mm.
And I contacted this journalist, like, what's happening? He said, oh, check back in 20 minutes, it's going to go live. Well, 20 minutes came and went, nothing. Next day, the following day, day after that, a week after that, no story. Then all of a sudden, I said, look, we made this interview. I'm going to put this interview up on my own page in the raw form that I recorded it from my own computer.
Sure.
And so I did. And then apparently his superiors didn't like that. So they basically tried first to make a privacy claim against the video that was recorded from my computer. That didn't go anywhere. So now they have made a copyright claim against my account in that video, even though the video came from my computer, was recorded by me, was put on my page with a copyright notice put by me on that video. So now I'm in a back and forth with YouTube or Google LLC, which owns YouTube, and they have put a 90-day strike on my account. On a bogus copyright claim made by an individual associated with an organization such as the Independent UK. This is how far
Yeah.
this goes. Okay.
Yeah, and Sheikh, it's so interesting because there's also a good friend of mine that I have been given the platform to, and he has been exposing a lot of the satanic elements within the U.S. military. He's a whistleblower, and with me, I assure you, with me, this video will go up right
Yes, I
away,
know. Yeah.
and you have my permission to download this and upload it wherever you would like to,
Thank you.
and
It
anytime
won't.
you like,
It
yeah,
won't go on my YouTube account until this whole thing with them is resolved over this bogus copyright claim. I mean, just again, video recorded from your own computer, you
I
upload
know,
it, and then someone comes and makes a copyright claim over a video that you recorded from your own computer. Okay,
yeah.
that's
And
you.
you're welcome to come back anytime with any future discussions, unapologetically, Sheikh, to address the things you want to address.
No problem.
And my platform, Alhamdulillah, is growing. I'm gonna reach 2,000 subscribers, inshallah, hopefully by the
Inshallah.
end of the summer.
Inshallah.
So you have a safe space with me, including this whistleblower who's been exposing these things. So anytime, and you're welcome to share this wherever you would like to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
And
much.
my love and light. I will put a link for Sheikh's Twitter and his blog dates and receive his light and the nur that he's giving to all of the ummah. And with that,
Thank you.
to all of you that are watching, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.